Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time watching the show, let me give you a quick run through. Here on the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive Focus Commander decks. A Focus Commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Each and every single one of our decks is built within a $25 budget. That's $25 for 100 cards. Now that you understand the premise of the show, let's get on with the show. Today's commander is going to be Sram, Senior Edificer. Sram is a 2/2 Dwarf Advisor that has whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Aura and equipment spells are the lifeblood of a Voltron deck, and Sram rewards you for casting those. He also rewards you for casting vehicles, but that's not going to be the focus of this deck. And unlike many Voltron decks, we're going to focus on auras over equipment. We're going to be doing this so that we can be faster than our competition, since White has a ton of cheap and effective auras at its disposal. And that's exactly what our strategy for this deck is. We're going to be trying to cast as many auras as we can as quickly as possible. Remember that each time we cast an aura, we will be drawing a card off of Sram's ability, so it will help keep our hand full. Since we are a Voltron deck, we are going to be winning with commander damage by hitting our opponents with an unstoppable Sram. As with every Commander's Quarters deck, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. Let's go on to tactic number 1, safety first. Sram is not only our value engine, but he is our win con, so we need him in play to be effective. In order to do that, we're going to protect him with cards like Swiftfoot Boots. By equipping this to Sram, it will give him hexproof and haste, and while the haste is nice, it's mainly in here for the hexproof. Next up, we have 3 auras that will protect Sram from one color of our choosing when they enter the battlefield. First up, we have Flickering Ward, which we can bring back to our hand for just a white, and then we can recast it just for a white, making it basically a 2-mana draw spell that is continuous. Then we have Ward of Lights, which we can cast at instant speed, but if we do that, then we will have to sacrifice it. Finally, there's Pentarch Ward, which will draw us an additional card when it comes into play. Next up, we have Guildscorn Ward, which will give Sram protection from multicolored. The majority of commanders that people run are multicolored commanders, so this can come in really handy. Then we are running 3 auras that give Sram protection from 2 colors. For just 1 mana, Shield of Duty and Reason will give him protection from green and blue, and Mask of Law and Grace will give him protection from black and red. Crown of Awe will also give Sram protection from black and red, though it does cost 1 more. It does have another ability, but we're never going to use that since we aren't running any other creatures that share creature type with Sram. Next up, we have 5 auras that will protect Sram from one specific color. Blue, red, and green ward will protect Sram from their respective colors. And then he's going to be protected from black with Black Ward and Strength of Isolation. While the +1/+2 buff from Strength of Isolation will be nice, the Madness cost will probably never come into play. And finally, we have Flicker Form, which might just be the best form of protection that we have for Sram. Flicker Form is an aura that allows us to pay 2 white, and we can exile Sram and all auras attached to him, and then bring those all back at the end of the turn still attached. This can come in huge for us in order to avoid board wipes as well as spells that would destroy some of our enchantments. Speaking of ways to protect Sram from board wipes, let's move on to tactic number 2, under my UMBRA-ELLA. Our first 3 cards are going to give Sram Totem Armor, which basically means that if Sram would be destroyed, we can just sacrifice the aura instead. Hyena Umbra will give him Totem Armor as well as +1/+1 and First Strike. Then there's Feldar Umbra, which will also give Sram Totem Armor and Lifelink, and then we can also move it on to another creature if we would like to. Finally, there's Eland Umbra, which will give Sram Totem Armor as well as +0/+4. Umbras can come in huge in this deck by saving Sram and keeping him in play. Our next card is Umbra Mystic, which will basically turn every single aura in our deck into an Umbra. When she's on the battlefield, auras attached to permanents we control have Totem Armor. Again, we are going to be casting a ton of these cheap auras very quickly, so it's going to be very hard for our opponents to kill Sram while the Umbra Mystic is in play. She's so valuable, in fact, that we may just put some auras on her to give her some Totem Armor herself. And then we have Shielded by Faith and Indestructibility, which both give Sram Indestructible. Making Sram indestructible is just simply better than Totem Armor, since we won't have to sack any auras when he would be destroyed. Alright, so we've talked about putting a ton of auras onto Sram to protect him, but you know what? Our opponent's creatures need some auras too, so let's go on to tactic number 3, the Pacifier. Our opponents won't just be sitting still when we are playing our spells, they're going to be putting out their own creatures as well. White gives us a ton of cheap and effective auras that help us deal with these creatures. First up, we have Pacifism, which when we enchant a creature with it, won't be able to attack or block. Then there's Compulsory Rest, which does the exact same thing, but it does give our opponents an out. They can pay 2 colorless to sacrifice that creature and gain 2 life. Finally, we have Bonds of Faith, which is pretty much going to be the exact same thing as Pacifism most of the time. The only time it won't work is when the opponent's creature is a human. Finally, we have some Pacifism-like auras that are a bit more conditional. By enchanting a creature with Oppressive Rays, it won't be able to attack, block, or activate its abilities unless its controller pays 3. Cowed by Wisdom will force a creature's controller to pay 1 for each card in our hand in order to attack or block with it. Since nearly every single spell we cast in this deck will draw us a card, we are pretty much going to have a full grip at all times, making it very hard for them to pay this. Then we're running Kurtar's Desire, which will prevent a creature from attacking, and if we have Threshold, it will also prevent them from blocking. So we just talked about 6 cards that do pretty much what Pacifism does. But we're not done sharing our cards with our opponents. We've got some more coming up in tactic number 4. How about no? First up, we have Brainwash, which will prevent a creature from attacking unless its controller pays 3. Then there's Guard Duty, which will just straight up give a creature Defender so it can attack. Defang and Muzzle will both prevent any damage that would be dealt by the creature that they're enchanting. Temporal Isolation will do the exact same thing, but we can cast it at instant speed, and it will give the creature Shadow, so it can only block other creatures that have Shadow. Then there's Guilty Conscience, which won't prevent any damage, but whenever that creature does deal damage, it's going to deal that much damage back to itself. Spectral Grasp will prevent one of our opponent's creatures from attacking us or blocking any of our creatures. However, they are still free to use this creature against our opponents by attacking them or blocking their creatures. We are running a total of 54 enchantments in this deck, which makes Sphere of Safety absolutely insane. With it in play, our opponents won't be able to attack us unless they pay 1 for each enchantment that we control. This will not only include auras that are on our creatures, but also the auras that we have placed on our opponent's creatures. With this in play, it is usually impossible for our opponents to pay for even 1 creature to attack us. Finally, we're going to be running 2 auras that prevent our opponents from activating the abilities of a creature. Gala Shackles will do this and will also prevent the creature from blocking. Unfortunately, Snowlands are out of our budget, so we're not going to be running any of those in this deck, so we can't activate its ability. Then there's Detainment Spell, which will prevent our opponent from activating the ability of a creature, and we can move it to another creature just by paying 1 and a white. Alright, so we've talked about playing defensively by protecting Sram and protecting ourselves from our opponent's creatures, but now it's time to start swinging. Time for tactic number 5, get big. Ethereal Armor is going to be the golden pig of this deck, meaning that it is the number 1 card out of our 99. It's an aura that just for white, it will give Sram +1/+1 for each enchantment we control, and it's going to give him first strike. This gets out of control quick in our deck, since we will be playing a ton of enchantments very fast. The average converted mana cost of this deck is extremely low at 1.9, and 26 of our auras cost only 1 mana. So if we are able to get Ethereal Armor out early, it is going to pay us dividends quickly. For example, if we had Ethereal Armor in our opening hand with 2 other auras that cost 1 apiece, we would be able to cast them all on turn 3. Ethereal Armor would give him +3/+3 and first strike, turning him into a 5/5 on turn 3 on its own. And Sram could be even bigger depending on what those other 2 auras are. Sage's Reverie is another card that puts our opponents on a very quick clock. It's going to give Sram +1/+1 and draw us a card for every single aura that we control. This is going to help us dig through our deck to find cards like these next 2. Helm of the Gods is pretty much the equipment version of Ethereal Armor, but it doesn't give first strike. And then there's Eidolon of Countless Battles, which is a bestow creature. For 2 white, we can attach him to Sram, and it will give him +1/+1 for each creature we control and each aura we control. And if Sram happens to leave the battlefield, it's going to become a creature with power equal to the number of creatures we control plus the number of auras we control. Then we have Blackblade Reforge, which is an equipment that will give Sram +1/+1 for each land we control. Since Sram is a legendary creature, it's going to give us a nice discount on the equip cost. Then there's Armored Ascension, which will give Sram +1/+1 for each planes we control and flying. Since we are only running planes in this deck, both of these cards will pump Sram by the exact same amount. Imperial Plate and Imperial Armor both give Sram +1/+1 for each card in our hand. Most of the time, that's going to be +7/+7 with all the drawing that we do off of Sram. Finally, we're running Battle Mastery, which will give Sram double strike. With just a few of those other auras attached, this is going to turn Sram into a one-hit kill. Being buff isn't everything though. Let's go into tactic number 6, get smart. We're going to be running a Quarter Shield and Cathar's Shield, which both do the exact same thing. They are both 0-cost equipment that gives Sram +0/+3 and Vigilance. +0/+3 is nice, but the main reason these cards are in the deck is because of that vigilance. By giving Sram vigilance, we can not only have him swing on offense, but we can also have him back for defense to protect us. This makes it really hard for our opponents to justify attacking us, because the majority of the time Sram is going to be the biggest creature on the board and can eat any one of their creatures. It's going to be even harder for them to justify attacking us if we put Spirit Loop or Spirit Link onto Sram. Spirit Loop is going to give Sram lifelink, and if Sram ever dies, it's going to come right back to our hand so we can put it right back on him. Spirit Link will also give Sram lifelink, but with the way it's worded, we can also use it as a defensive card. We can also put this card onto any of our opponent's creatures, and then we will gain life whenever they do damage. Though most of the time we're just going to put this on Sram since he'll probably be the biggest creature on the board. Both of these cards are going to help us gain a ton of life and put us out of the reach of any of our opponents. Then we are running Cartouche of Solidarity, which might seem like an odd include in this deck. Even if we give Sram Indestructible and Hexproof, he is still vulnerable to sacrifice effects. Cartouche of Solidarity will not only give Sram +1/+1 and First Strike, but it's also going to create a 1/1 warrior. And this warrior token can come in very handy when one of our opponents forces us to sacrifice a creature. Now, we mentioned some cards earlier that give Sram protection from colors, and those will help us get Sram through most of the time. But we want to be absolutely positive that we can hit our opponents with Sram when we want to, so let's go on to tactic number 7, coming through. Both Spirit Mantle and Unquestioned Authority will give Sram protection from creatures, making him unblockable. In addition, Spirit Mantle will give him +1/+1, and Unquestioned Authority will draw us a card when it comes into play. These are the best ways that we get Sram through our opponent's lines, but there are others, including Griff's Boon. Griff's Boon will give Sram +1/+0 and flying, and if it ever goes into our graveyard, we can return it to our hand by paying 3 and a white. Then we are running the Scarab for each color. For example, if we have Green Scarab attached to Sram, it will give him +2/+2 as long as one of our opponents controls a green permanent. He also won't be able to be blocked by any green creatures. The same rules apply to each of the other Scarabs for their corresponding color. Alright, so we've talked about a ton of great cards in this deck that you can use to help you win. And Sram's ability does help you get to those cards, but there are ways to get to them faster. Let's go on to tactic number 8, dig deeper. If we have Mesa Enchantress in play, whenever we cast an enchantment spell, we're going to get to draw a card. If Sram is in play, that means we will be drawing 2 cards for each enchantment that we cast. Then there's Core Spirit Dancer, who can be another win condition in this deck. Like Sram, she also draws us a card whenever we cast an aura spell. However, unlike Sram, she gets +2/+2 for each aura that's equipped to her. If Sram dies too many times and is too expensive to cast, switching over to Core Spirit Dancer isn't a bad idea. With all of the cheap auras in this deck, she's going to get big in no time. Then we have Conviction, which is going to give Sram +1/+3, but it's also got that same ability that Flickering Ward does. By paying just a white, we can return to our hand and recast it in order to dig deeper through our deck. Open the Armory is going to allow us to search for any aura or equipment card and put it directly into our hand. This spell is amazing in that it gives us the perfect card for the situation that we are in. Alright, so we're going to be investing a lot into Sram by throwing a ton of auras onto him. One of the worst things that can happen is that we lose all of those auras. To prevent that, let's go to tactic number 9, going home. First, we are going to be running Scarab the Unseen, which we can sacrifice in order to return all the enchantments on Sram back to our hand. There are times when we simply can't save Sram no matter how many auras we have on him, so getting those auras back to our hand is the best we can do. And as a little bonus, it's also going to draw us a card at the beginning of our next upkeep. Then we have Remove Enchantments, which is a very old card with a ton of text on it, and I don't want to get any of it wrong, so I'm just going to read it to you. Remove Enchantments is an instant that says, return to your hand all enchantments you both own and control, all auras you own attached to permanents you control, and all auras you own attached to attacking creatures your opponents control. Then destroy all other enchantments you control, all other auras attached to permanents you control, and all other auras attached to attacking creatures your opponents control. The main thing that we care about with this card, though, is that it will bring back those auras that are attached to Sram, so just keep that in mind. What happens, though, if we don't have one of those cards to save all of our auras and we get set back really far? Well, that's when we go into tactic number 10, Plan B. Open the Vaults can bring us right back to where we were at by returning all artifacts and enchantments from all graveyards back to the battlefield. That means that every single one of our enchantments, including our auras, will come back and we can attach them directly to Sram. Then we have Pariah, which can just straight up stop any of our opponents from doing damage to us. This works especially well when Sram has Indestructible or even when he just has Totem Armor. And it works perfectly when one of our opponents has a creature with Indestructible because they'll have to get rid of it in order to deal damage to us. Finally, we are running Sigil of the Empty Throne, which says whenever we cast an enchantment spell, we get to create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. By the time this comes out, we will be casting a ton of enchantments in a turn, giving us an army of 4/4 flying angels. This deck is very fast and can kill by turn 4, 5, or 6 with the right hand. Once we have the right auras and equipment in place, Sram can be impossible for some of our opponents to deal with. And even if we can't win with Sram straight up, we have other ways to win as well. So if you like casting a ton of spells, drawing a lot of cards, and swinging with a huge creature, this might be the deck for you. But now that we've gone through the cards that help us win, let's go through the cards that make the deck work. Let's go through the mana base. Our mana base is as straightforward as possible. We are running 32 planes. Again, our average converted mana cost for the deck is 1.9, so we want every single one of our lands to come into play untapped so we can cast our spells as quickly as possible. Alright, now that we've gone through every single card in the deck, let's do a quick price check. Our deck prices here at the Commander's Quarters are calculated using TCG Player Optimization. We even optimize our decks with heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average EDH rec deck is going to set you back $252.06. Let's see how we compare to that. For our Sram deck, we are actually able to use every single penny of our budget and came in at exactly $25. Again, our Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused for our $25 budget, but there are always ways that you can improve on them. Let's go through some reasonable upgrades to see what some of those ways just might be. With our reasonable upgrades, I usually try to keep them under $10, but for this next card, I'm going to have to make an exception. If you were to add Daybreak Coronet to the deck, it just might be the best aura that you have. As long as Sram has an enchantment on him, you can put Daybreak Coronet on him as well, and it will give him +3/+3 First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. With this amount of value, no wonder this card is currently over $11. Then we have Retether, which will return each aura from our graveyard to play. While this doesn't hit all enchantments and artifacts like Empty the Vaults does, this only works for us, and it costs 2 less. At $4.14 though, we just weren't able to fit it into the budget. Next up we have Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which does some crazy things in this deck. For 2, we're going to tap it and choose white, and then it will add an amount of mana to our mana pool equal to our devotion to white. With all of the cheap white auras in this deck, we will have a ton of white mana symbols on the board. At $9.13, you'll really have to stretch your budget in order to include this one though. Then there's Grand Abolisher, which comes in at $5.82. He's a 2/2 creature that reads, during your turn your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Basically, this would just be a great way to protect Sram on our turn and to make sure that we can swing through with Sram without having to worry about it. Hammer of Nazan is an amazing equipment that costs 4 to cast and 4 to equip. However, we won't have to pay to equip it the first time, because when it enters the battlefield or another equipment enters the battlefield under our control, we can attach that equipment to target creature we control. There's no wonder it costs $8.69 though, because it's going to give our equipped creature +2/+0 and indestructible. Finally, we have Darksteel Mutation, which would probably be the meanest card that we would put in this deck. This card is a commander killer, because it's going to make that creature a 0/1, give it indestructible, and make it lose all of its other abilities, card types, and creature types. This will pretty much make their commander effectively useless and very hard for them to get back. Alright, enough looking at potential current commander cards, let's look into the future. It's time for our next section, Looking Ahead. At the time of this recording, Commander 2018 is just about to come out, so let's look through some cards that might be effective in some commander decks in the future. Now, while these next 2 cards might not be good in this Sram deck specifically, they're probably going to be good in other mono-white decks in the future. Endless Atlas is an artifact that costs 2, and then it has 2 tap, draw a card, activate this ability only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. Mono-white decks have a terrible time at drawing cards, and this card is exactly what they need. At $2.43, this card is probably an auto-add in the majority of mono-white and mono-red decks. Then we have Isolated Watchtower, which is a land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and scry 1. Then we may reveal the top card of our library. If it's a basic land card, then we can put it onto the battlefield tapped. We can only activate this ability though if an opponent controls at least 2 more lands than us. Again, many monocolored decks outside of green struggle at ramp, so this card could be huge in them, and at $2.57, it's a very reasonable include in those decks. But I mostly want to hear from you about these cards, so let me know in the comments below if you think either of these cards are going to become monocolored staples. And that about wraps up our show today. Thank you so much for watching. In the description below, you'll find the link to the deck list as well as the links to our Twitter and Facebook, so feel free to reach out and say hi. Also in the description is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to all the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron of the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. If you enjoyed this deck tech, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and check out some of our other deck techs. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.